Welcome back to Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson, the host of the show, along with good friends Joe Niola and Myles Ganfried. And after our show last night, we were talking about a book that Myles brought up by Sinclair Lewis entitled It Can't Happen Here. And we were trying to figure out if it has a modern day application and whether the thrust of the book was that it can't happen here or that, hey, wake up, folks, because it could happen here. Tell us a little bit about this book, Myles.
Yeah, the book was written in 1935, and it was written actually in about 4 months. And I think the motivation was significant because it was in 1935 that the Nazis were making significant inroads, and there was a great deal of fear being raised. But on the other hand, in the United States, there was isolationism, and people felt this had nothing to do with us. And so the book really tried to present the case for possibly it could happen here. And how could it happen? The central character of the book is, interestingly enough, a Vermont newspaper editor. Mm-hmm. His name is not Bernie Sanders, but he lives in Vermont.
So it's often to stick somewhere in a more countrified, setting.
Yeah, this is a bucolic setting in a small town in Vermont. Mm-hmm. And it has a social structure, which we, of course, could imagine for a small town. And it has a political dichotomy of a smattering of what we might call today liberals, mm-hmm. but largely people who are conservative mm-hmm. in their viewpoint. And in the book, the point is made by the people who are in power in the town that those rabble-rousers are the ones who support Roosevelt, mm-hmm. And they don't have jobs because they don't work hard enough. And it's us hardworking, good people in our town that really are the salt of the earth of the United States. And the book proceeds from the point at which there's a senator who ultimately becomes, in a sense, the Fuhrer, mm-hmm. Rises in power because he's exploiting the anger of the people with regard to the fact that they don't have jobs and there isn't much of a future for them. And some of that stuff sounds a bit familiar even today. Well, interestingly enough, notwithstanding the book was written in 1935 and was a bestseller, mm-hmm. it also was converted by Sinclair Lewis and an associate into a play. Mm. And the play was produced in many places throughout the United States.
And this is It Can't Happen Here.
I think the play was actually called It Can Happen Here.
Ah, so they flipped it around.
Yeah, I think they did.
For the people that didn't understand that the tenor of the book was that, hey, yes. Watch out.
Right.
Be careful.
The book was more tongue-in-cheek. Now, interestingly enough, we might say, well, all right, that was then and this is now. Maybe people are too sophisticated now for anything like that to happen. But interestingly enough, the play has been produced in relatively recent times, and somebody has taken to writing a new version of the play, which appeared the first time at some college in the Midwest. So in other words, this idea of, well, here's America, these people have had democracy and liberty for 200 years. How could it possibly happen here? They have a tradition. They're special people. They're anointed.
Well, you mentioned in last night's show, you mentioned Huey Long, the kingfish in Louisiana, who was someone that rose up pretending to be a populist, pretending to be for the good of everybody, of all the
Yes.
regular folk,
Yes.
while he was gaining power
Yes.
in order to control the regular folk once they handed it over to him.
Yes. Yes.
And I'm hearing a little bit of Ayn Rand, the famous Russian author,
Yes.
Ayn Rand,
Absolutely.
coming forth in this, that
Yes.
that the folks that have say, we got it, screw those that don't have it. It just means they're not working hard enough.
That's right. It's their fault.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Blame the oppressed rather than blame the folks that are left behind for being left behind.
Exactly.
When we're the ones that are actually leaving them behind.
Right. Now, I really don't mean to in a way brand Donald Trump, but interestingly enough, you mentioned Huey Long. Mm-hmm. Now, Huey Long, before he gained political power, he was something of a minor crook. Mm-hmm. He actually was involved in selling stock for property that allegedly had oil on it and was in reality nothing but swampland.
Sort of like putting forth a university that's guaranteed to turn you into a multimillionaire,
right,
without too much effort, and in fact is taking your money,
yes,
in order to make themselves.
Right.
And the real estate is filled with these kind of folks too. And those of you that watch late night television and see all the shows on real estate about flipping properties and all these ideas on how to get a property for dirt cheap, fix it up for a song, and then resell it and make a lot of money, or own multiple properties and become wealthy that way. Same thing. If these guys were giving you useful information to get you there, they wouldn't be sharing it. They'd be keeping it to themselves and saying, the hell with everybody else. I'm just going to be the only one using this surefire method to become rich and get richer. But they get richer by pretending that they can share with you these great ideas on becoming wealthy. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be what Trump University was all about. Now, political ideology. We talked a little bit about fascism, a little bit about oligarchy, where they rule by the wealthy. And want to go through any other political ideologies that we maybe should watch out for?
Well, before we launch into that mm-hmm. direction, we may tend here today in the United States to feel that, it's a sheer impossibility for a would-be fascist to take over. And yet, Germany, back in the late 20s, had a perfect constitution. It had a sophisticated population. It had laws that were certainly rational and protected individuals. It had courts. But what happened was, and let me just say it parenthetically, there's a wonderful book which is almost a parallel to It Can't Happen Here, written back in, I think it was the late 20s in Germany, by a man by the name of Leon Furtwängler.
Furtwängler, okay.
Have you heard it? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, sounds like Frankfurter.
Yeah, he was a popular author.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, like Sinclair Lewis. And he saw what was happening in Germany, how it was happening, and he wrote a book called Success. Mm-hmm. That's the
good snappy title.
Yeah, and
it's something you want to pick up and take a quick look at and maybe get drawn into.
Yeah, and as he describes it, there was this slow, insidious process in which the judges of the courts with these marvelous laws in Germany became fear-stricken by the thugs of the Nazi organization. And so the court system no longer worked to protect the rights of individuals, and the whole thing collapsed. And we know the rest of that story. So in other words, could it happen there? It seems hard to imagine.
So what happened there was that the courts were terrorized. the judges feared for their lives.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
In a modern world, that's not necessary. They could be bought, and their financial present and financial future could be they can be deprived of that financial ability to sustain themselves in a society that requires a minimum amount of wealth.
Well, an issue is, you point out a way it could happen, and that's valid. They could be bought or whatever. But in any case, look how tenuous that thread is, that the society is so dependent upon courts to make rational decisions and protect our rights.
And if they're going to be swayed either through the fear of losing their comfortable lives, or their comfortable life,
or losing their lives,
and be terrorized into. And you see cases of that here in the United States from time to time, where a judge or a prosecutor is murdered, and it's a message that's being sent to other judges and prosecutors to watch out, because the same could happen to you. And whether or not they want to admit that they're being influenced by that fear, you can't really help.
Now, interestingly enough,
fear.
Along those lines, Trump knows that he's on bedrock, because he made a statement that said, I could pull out a gun and shoot someone dead on Fifth Avenue in New York, and I wouldn't lose 1% of my support.
Yeah, what's that all about? And I remember very clearly, he said it more than once. He said it quite a few times. He's made that claim that essentially his supporters are so enthralled by him that no matter what he does, no matter what he says, no matter how outrageous he is, that they'll follow him almost, it's an overused phrase, but like a rock star. That he's above the law, above reproach, and can do whatever he wants, and the more outrageous he is, people seem to like him the more. And it's a fair statement, and I think we've seen that pretty clearly. But is that something you want people to act like?
I don't know what percentage of his supporters would actually buy into that one. That one is pretty strong. And the polls currently are indicating that his favorability is dropping significantly.
Well, now he's in the big audience now, and now he's not in a little, in a one party where he stands out so differently than any of the candidates. Even though the things he says are basically what they're all thinking about race, about ethnicity, about religion. He just says it out loud, and he gets his kudos from those that like what he says and wish the other Republicans would, man up and say the things that they're saying behind closed doors.
Well, the networks have already capitalized on him. They've already played his reality show during the primaries. Okay, now they may come to the conclusion that they will collect their profits and try and bring in some revenue by painting a different picture of him. This might work.
So they'll turn it into a reality play, or a drama where in the first act they give him all the latitude he needs, and all the free press that he wants in order to build himself up
and build the audience.
And then later on,
now they can
watch out and they pull the rug out from under him. And many media outlets are doing that.
Right. That's what they.
Washington Post loves to try to build people up and then break them down.
Well,
is in the process of doing that.
It depends on the outlet. Fox likes him. He brings in money. And,
that's the bottom line.
And also, Fox has to be really careful that they don't marginalize him too much, because they're certainly not part of the Democratic camp, the Hillary camp. So they play this. It's a game. It's the way they operate.
Yeah,
well,
if I could,
are we saying though?
Les Moonves of CBS, and he clearly and honestly said Donald Trump is the best thing that ever happened to CBS because all they have to do is lead off a news broadcast with, today, Donald Trump said, and bang, they've got the audience.
Yeah.
People are going to watch the broadcast because they want to hear. It's like putting the sports at the end of the news. You leave the thing at the end of the news to bring people. You throw a little something out there in the beginning, and people want to hang around to see sports or whatever happens to come at the end. Usually it's sports.
I think in a private conversation that we had, I brought up this thing about information theory.
Yeah, information theory. Yeah. Give a little. Run that by us again because it had some very interesting validity.
Yeah. In other words, the more improbable something is, the more information content there is. And Donald Trump was actually a classic example of information theory, because what he said was highly improbable, right? Things about Meghan and things about Carly Fiorina being too homely to be president. Well, those things were so off the charts that the information content was enormous, and with information content that was enormous, there was attention.
It got a buzz from people.
It sure did.
Every side of each statement he would make, you got people talking.
Yeah, but I think an intelligent individual could sort of just kind of blow it off and pick up some of their information, from sources. It's such an obvious ploy. Maybe it isn't such an obvious ploy. Maybe it is. Maybe it works.
It is, and yet did it not work?
It worked.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever been done before like that. In other words, live on television, where a candidate actually says, you remember this was said to, I think, Rubio.
Yeah.
He said, "Oh, you're just giving us these lines that you were rehearsed on.
Yeah.
And you keep giving us the same lines over and over again. Don't you know anything yourself?" Right? He destroyed him, I think.
Well, no,
just like that.
And then when
in those words, he was finished.
Yeah, he'll label them. Lying Cruz, and if it's not lying Cruz, it's crooked Hillary. He uses these adjectives that all of a sudden perk in people's heads.
Yeah.
But it's the improbability of it.
That's part of it,
bears with it this tremendous information flow.
Yeah, but then...
And I think people love that.
Yeah.
Until they start to think about whether, hopefully, until people start to think about whether you want somebody in a seat of power, such as the presidency of the United States, that says such outlandish things.
Yeah, but wouldn't you say this? There are people, lots of them probably, who want a power figure. They want somebody powerful. And if he can,
those are the weaker elements,
slice people up, like that.
That shows that he's powerful.
Absolutely.
And that's where we began our first show, trying to figure out, we were trying to come up with who, because we all know, as we all know amongst us, not only know people that are Donald Trump supporters, but we have friends that we trust and like, and yet we can't figure out why in the world they support Donald Trump.
There's got to be something unhealthy in the society, intrinsically in the society,
playing on the weakness of people
that encourages them to accept this kind of leadership figure. As a democracy, we should kind of sit back and remind ourselves that we are the power behind the country. We the people.
Yep.
And he doesn't say that. He says, "I can do this."
Yep.
You gotta support me.
It's all centered on him.
It's all centered on him.
Yeah.
And if you are one of the unhealthy elements in the society, you'll buy into that, because a society that's strong and healthy doesn't require and doesn't admire that kind of leadership. But hey, that's where we're at. And also this thing on NATO now.
Go ahead.
He's of the opinion that we don't need NATO anymore. I don't know where he got that idea from, but it does make sense. We did need NATO when we had the Soviet Union. We don't have the Soviet Union anymore. And we're supporting an organization practically single-handed financially. So,
well, you know, there was something that I thought about the other day that's worthy of putting on the table.
Good.
Yeah. With regard to NATO, I can understand how some of the major players, aside from the United States, in order to participate fully in NATO, what do we make them do? We make them buy F-16s. Mm-hmm. We make them buy all kinds of American weaponry, technology.
So the outgo is from we, the taxpayers, into NATO, and the payback is
comes back
not to us as taxpayers, but goes to
General Dynamics
and the corporations that are selling their military hardware
to Boeing. So
it's not a back and forth.
So there's another example of the potential demagogue or fascist in conflict with the oligarchy.
Yeah.
All right, and this is incredible because the position of of democracy now is on the sidelines. The struggle now and the push is the fascist versus the oligarchs. And this is a perfect example of it. We don't need NATO because NATO is giving you up there with the big bucks that are probably not going to channel it into my election some money on the sale of arms. All right, and why should we use tax money for that? We could use it for something else.
And yet I really don't think when push came to shove, if he had his way, that it would play out that way. I don't think you'd see. They'd find some other way to persuade countries, the NATO countries, our allies, to buy military hardware from our big corporations that make the military hardware.
Well, the reason that I raised the issue was that I thought that NATO probably tends to balk at spending really large sums of money on American weaponry, and yet there really isn't much of an alternative.
Okay, we're going to continue the conversation. We're coming down the home stretch, but you got to come to the studio if you want to hear the conversation that goes on afterwards. David Stevenson, Joe Niola, Myles Ganfried, continue with your thought, Myles.
Yeah, it seems that we can understand how perhaps NATO doesn't want to put a whole lot of effort into their share of the bargain, and that effort is money when you come right down to it. And these airplanes today and whatnot, have gotten to be enormously expensive. During World War II, they would build a fighter plane for about $25,000.
Yeah.
That was a really hot machine, right? And now, they run over $100 million a copy.
Yeah, the F-35, which we're not really sure whether they ever figured out a way for it to fly yet, but that's into the $1 billion range.
Yeah,
more than $1 billion for one jet.
One copy, you're saying.
Yeah. So if you want that state-of-the-art airplane, you have to buy it from the United States.
Yeah, that's the point.
Yeah.
In other words, they can't make that themselves.
So
I can understand where they're,
Yeah. And if you want to win that election, all right, you got to get the support of the oligarchs.
Well, I'm not sure that I subscribe to that, Joe. I hear what you're saying. There's some merit to it. But I think that democracy is alive and well, and I think that Bernie was a classic example.
So there is hope.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think Bernie may have, we didn't get to talk about this, but I think Bernie started a little bit late, and there were some issues in his campaign that might have played out a little better for him.
Well, we got 45+% of the pledged delegates.
Yeah, fantastic.
And this is Progressive Soup, and I'm David Stevenson, and we shall see you next week. We tape Monday afternoons. Come sit in and watch. That way you hear the whole conversation. Continue.
All right. We still have 2020. Still have the year 2020. I mean, maybe.
Yeah,
you don't know what the state of the country is going to be like 4 years from now. We don't even know what the country is going to be like a few months from now.
Yeah, there
are still conventions, Republican, Democratic.
We're off the air now.
Are we off
Is that
the
right?
air?
No.
No, we're not
No?
off the air.
Oh,
We're still
okay.
talking.
No.
All right.
All right, get your last one in there.
Okay,
Get that
yes.
zinger
All right.
in there.
Can I
And-
have a, yeah, what I wanted to
Yeah.
say was, I think that what we saw in the last 8 or 10 months with Bernie and his ability to raise funds, that was just so reassuring about where American democracy is. The fact that so much money could be raised for a political cause from we the people, through our little $10, $30 contributions.
But here's the thing. Along with that $10 or $20 contribution came a person that was making phone calls, a person that was standing out there, the person that was speaking to their neighbors, speaking to their friends, speaking to their relatives, and carrying on the conversation. It was more than just that. We did more good with the grassroots type of speaking to your neighbors, door to door, phoning.
Right.
We did more good with that than we did with the expensive TV commercials that we bought.
It was more than money. It was more than money.
Yeah.
The money stoked it a little bit, but the money bought a lot of pizza for a lot of folks that sat around and spend their free time making the phone calls.
I think the whole system should be, in terms of the promotional aspects of it, it should all be public service. I don't think that they should be permitted to put the kind of money into it that they do, because it's always the one with the big bucks that has the edge. And
is that true, though? The reason I mentioned, that business of contributions being sent in, people are aware of the big bucks. When they see a commercial on television, they know that was paid for by, who knows, the Koch brothers or God knows who. Yeah, they understand that.
They tend to tune it out.
Yeah, I think they tune it out. And on the other hand, when they know that the money that helped Bernie to make his point really came from us.
And I think you're right. I think it really did have that kind of advertising. Grassroots is overused, of course, but it's truly what it was. It was advertising and reaching out person to person that people really listen to. They have to, whether they agree with you or not, they have to say, wow, that Joe Niola really believes in what he's talking about. Wow.